What is up, everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the 3&D here on the Empty the Bench podcast network. Make sure you hit subscribe below and follow our socials at the 3&D ETB and at ETB Network. On tonight's episode, we'll be looking at the massive Damian Lillard trade that just went down, all of its ramifications for the teams involved, and the eventual Jrue Holiday trade that ended up being a domino effect from that trade. We'll also be looking at James Harden missing training camp. That news just came out this past weekend. Kai Jones and his suspension with the Charlotte Hornets. And then we'll be going over two more divisions as we continue our NBA season previews, as the Southeast Division and the Northwest divisions will be going over. Hope everybody's doing well. NBA training camp is beginning this week, and news is already coming out about some of the drama across the league. Damian Lillard did get traded. I feel like this is episode 14 of the show. We restarted back in May, and I think we've been talking about this Damian Lillard trade on pretty much every episode since the show was restarted. So kind of fantasizing about what a trade could look like, but it ended up happening, and the Milwaukee Bucks acquired Damian Lillard from the Portland Trail Blazers officially. Damian Lillard was sent to the Milwaukee Bucks to team up with Giannis Antetokounmpo and Chris Middleton. In the trade, it was a three-team trade. The Phoenix Suns and the Portland Trail Blazers were also involved. The Phoenix Suns got Jusuf Nurkic and Nasir Little, both from the Portland Trail Blazers, and they also got Grayson Allen and Keon Johnson. Grayson Allen came over from the Milwaukee Bucks. So the Suns ended up getting four players in depth, and then the Trail Blazers in return got Jrue Holiday, DeAndre Ayton, Toumani Camara, who is a second-round rookie from Dayton, Milwaukee's 2029 first-round pick, and two Milwaukee pick swaps in 2028 and 2030. So they ended up getting one draft pick with the potential for two more draft picks. And then they got Jrue Holiday, DeAndre Ayton, Toumani Camara. They kept DeAndre Ayton and Toumani Camara. We'll be going over the Jrue Holiday trade, who they quickly flipped in just a few. But Damian Lillard is headed to the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Bucks are now stacking up. They have two of probably the top 20 best players in the NBA now, with him and Giannis Antetokounmpo. This was a team up that was not really too expected. I mean, we had been hearing for a long time that the front runners to land Damian Lillard was going to be the Miami Heat, and that was the team that he wanted to go to. But apparently, the rumors that we were going over were not as true as we originally thought. The Miami Heat were not his only destination that he wanted to go to. They had been saying for a while that he was going to shoot down any trade that wasn't to the Miami Heat, but apparently he was open to join the Milwaukee Bucks. He was also open to join the Brooklyn Nets too. That news came out. I went on our other show here on Empty the Bench Network with Nick and Tom, and we talked about it for a little bit, and I kind of gave my opinion on all the interesting stuff about the Damian Lillard trade and why going to Milwaukee kind of made sense. It definitely does make a lot of sense, and Miami probably wasn't willing to give up the insane amount that Portland demanded of them. So makes things a little bit more interesting. Lillard, 7-time All-Star, going to be joining Giannis and Chris Middleton. Originally, like I said, on Game On, I think that originally I thought that the Portland Trail Blazers got scammed big time in this trade. I was like, Jrue Holiday, they're going to end up probably releasing. All they really got is DeAndre Ayton, one first-round pick, and two pick swaps. Toumani Camara is just a second-round rookie. We don't know if he's going to be really anything yet, but you can't really expect too much out of him. But I originally thought that they didn't get very much, but I didn't put into a factor the amount that they would probably get back for trading Jrue Holiday. And when you see what they ended up getting back from the Boston Celtics, the Blazers got a pretty good haul for Damian Lillard. They ended up trading Damian Lillard, Yusuf Nurkic, and Nasir Little. So that's part of the reason why I thought the Blazers kind of gave up a lot, because they gave up those three guys. We get Damian Lillard, who is a superstar, but Yusuf Nurkic, who is one of the better starting centers in the NBA, and Nasir Little, who's turned into a very solid role player coming off the bench for the Portland Trail Blazers too. So very interesting trade. I think that the Bucks ended up doing very well. I know Bleacher Report kind of gave all three of them very high grades for this trade, but they gave the Bucks the worst grade just because they only brought in Lillard. They lost some depth. But the Suns and the Blazers ended up coming off very well. And I think the Phoenix Suns ended up coming off tremendously, because you look at the Phoenix Suns, they acquired Bradley Beal this offseason. They still have Kevin Durant. They still have Devin Booker. That's their big three. And their big goal was to acquire cheap depth around the three of those guys. The three of those guys are getting paid a lot of money. And putting together some cheap depth is exactly what a star power team needed. And they attacked free agency with that in mind and were able to acquire some good guys. So their starting five are now taking a look at the Phoenix Suns roster now after this trade. Their starting five: Bradley Beal, Devin Booker will be the backcourt. It'd be interesting to see who runs point. Josh Okogie will probably be starting at the three. Kevin Durant and Yusuf Nurkic now will most likely be their starting center now that DeAndre Ayton's gone. And then you look at their bench. If those five guys are starting, Grayson Allen, Eric Gordon, Nasir Little, Damian Lee, Drew Eubanks, Yuta Watanabe, Bol, Bismack Biyombo, Keita Bates-Diop, all coming off the bench for them. That's a pretty deep bench, if you ask me. And they went through this offseason trying to get a bunch of cheap deals. They signed Eric Gordon to a cheap deal, re-signed Damian Lee, brought in Drew Eubanks, brought in Yuta Watanabe, who's a knockdown three-point shooter, brought in Bol, re-signed Biyombo, brought in Keita Bates-Diop. I mean, they did a tremendous job. And Grayson Allen is a starting caliber shooting guard for almost every team in the NBA. He'll be your sixth or seventh man, depending on who else comes off the bench. I'm assuming Okogie will probably start since he's more of a three. And Grayson Allen's kind of more of a two. They already have two twos starting with Beal and Booker. So starting three shooting guards would kind of be interesting. So I feel like Josh Okogie probably steps into that starting role. And then Yusuf Nurkic, I mean, DeAndre Ayton was going to be the starting center. Yusuf Nurkic will step in, and I don't think that's a huge downgrade from DeAndre Ayton. Yusuf Nurkic, when healthy, is one of the better starting big men in the NBA. He's a very solid player, decent scorer, good rebounder, good rim protector, does a little bit of everything. So overall, the Damian Lillard trade was amazing for the Bucks, and I think that the Phoenix Suns ended up coming off tremendously as well. So jumping over from that, we have the Jrue Holiday trade. So the domino effect went into full effect after Damian Lillard was traded. Jrue Holiday, sadly, the day before Damian Lillard was traded, came out and said that he wanted to finish his career as a Milwaukee Buck. He loved being a Milwaukee Buck. He was part of the 2021 NBA championship team for the Bucks. Was potentially going down as a Bucks legend. And sadly, the name of the game, the business of the game, he was traded the very next day to the Portland Trailblazers. And obviously the Trailblazers were not going to hold on to him. They're kind of in rebuild mode. And they would have been able to get a lot for him. He was an all-star last year, only for the second time in his career, 10 years apart from his two all-star appearances, which actually was an NBA record. Just a little side note. But Jrue Holiday was dealt to the Boston Celtics. So the Celtics ended up trading. It was just a two-team trade. The Celtics acquired just Jrue Holiday, and they sent the Portland Trailblazers Malcolm Brogdon, Robert Williams III, the Warriors 2024 first-round pick for this upcoming year, and a 2029 first-round pick. So the Celtics ended up giving up a lot for Jrue Holiday. They gave up Brogdon, who was sixth man of the year this past year, Robert Williams, who they believe is one of the better defensive big men in the NBA. Was their starting center for a while. Didn't really start this year, but it's this past year because Al Horford kind of broke out and kind of revived his career. But he was coming off the bench as one of the better centers in the league. They thought he was a defensive player of the year type player. and then 2 first-round picks, including this upcoming year's first-round pick from the Warriors, which if the Warriors are solid, it'll probably be right around the 20s or something like that. But that's a pretty good haul to get back for the Blazers, I got to say. So the Portland Trail Blazers did a very good job. So you put those guys on top. They ended up trading Damian Lillard, Yusuf Nurkic, and Nasir Little. And in return, they got DeAndre Ayton, Malcolm Brogdon, Robert Williams III, Toumani Camara, 3 first-round picks, and 2 pick swaps. So that's what they ended up getting in return after giving up Lillard, Nurkic, and Little. So they ended up getting a very, very good amount. They'll probably hold on to Malcolm Brogdon. It looks like he's in the last year of his contract, and he's getting paid some decent money, so he'll probably be the veteran on that team. It'll be interesting to see if they end up buying him out. I could see it be one of those situations where he goes into the season as the Blazers either starting point guard, or if Scoot Henderson kind of starts right out of the gate, then he might be the 6th man for the Blazers. And if they fall out of contention early, which they probably will, they're probably going to be a rebuilding team this year, then they may end up buying out his contract, paying the rest of it off, and letting him go sign with a contender. So I could see that happening. Robert Williams, though, they've already come out and said he's part of their future. So it's very interesting. DeAndre Ayton now is going to be their future center. Robert Williams III being his backup. Those are 2 very good young centers, 2 defensive guys too. Not so bad pieces to replace Yusuf Nurkic for the Portland Trail Blazers. I like that. Ayton's also under both Ayton and Williams are both under contract for a few more years too. They both signed extensions with their teams before being traded. So they're both getting paid decent money, but they're under contract for a while too, so they don't have to worry about free agency. So another trade too that I think was fantastic for both teams. I also think that this trade could put the Celtics over the edge. I think that the Celtics going into the season, we reviewed the Celtics last week. We had Ben Cruz on the show, who's a big Celtics fan, and I said that the Celtics are one of the favorites to come out of the Eastern Conference again. Obviously they almost pulled off that down 3-0 deficit to make it to the NBA Finals again last year. They lost the NBA Finals 2 years ago, but this could end up putting them over the edge. Jrue Holiday, Derek White, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and either Porzingis or Al Horford will be their starting 5. They lost some depth. Obviously they lost Malcolm Brogdon, who probably was going to be the starting point guard, but you switched Jrue Holiday in, and that's a huge upgrade. And then you had Robert Williams III, who was a tremendous backup center. They lose him, and so they're going to have to replace him somehow. Luke Cornett, it looks like, it's probably going to get a lot more minutes because he is really the only backup center that they have under contract now. So that's going to make things really interesting to see what they do. But the Celtics, if healthy, I mean, a big 3 of Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Jrue Holiday, much better than they had before. They didn't really have a big 3 before. They kind of had just the big 2 and then very solid players around him. So now they have a big 3, and they have some decent depth. I mean, Porzingis will either start or come off the bench, and Horford will either start or come off the bench. So you have one of those guys as your starting center, and the other one's going to be your 6th man, which is pretty solid. Pretty solid situation to have. And they have some good pieces. I mean, Derek White's a good piece. So I think Jrue Holiday kind of puts them over the edge. Again, Damian Lillard probably puts Milwaukee over the edge too. So the Eastern Conference, the top half of the Eastern Conference is going to be a dogfight. I mean, you got the Bucks, who upgraded and have a legitimate big 3. You got the Celtics, who upgraded and may have a legitimate big 3 now. And I was saying for a while that, the Knicks being an Eastern Conference Finals team could very well happen. It's going to be a lot more difficult now that the Celtics and Bucks have upgraded this well. It's going to be very tough for any other team that's not named the Celtics and Bucks. It's going to be tough for the Heat as well. We'll see what the Heat end up doing. The Heat also apparently were interested in Jrue Holiday. No idea what they're going to do to answer back, but if they want to make it back to the NBA Finals after coming out of the East last year, they're going to have to do something like that. So that's it for the Damian Lillard trade. Lillard headed to Milwaukee. Jrue Holiday subsequently will be headed to the Boston Celtics. So a couple more news before we jump back into our NBA season previews. With training camp starting, James Harden will miss the start of training camp. So that news kind of just came out this past weekend. Not a shock at all to anybody who's been following the situation. He's flat out said that he has no interest in playing for the Sixers. He probably will not report to anything. He'll probably take all the fines that he has to until he gets traded. I don't think he really cares. So he's missing the start of training camp. He was nowhere in sight as training camp began. And this is also the second training camp he's set to miss now in the past 3 years. He missed the Brooklyn Nets training camp before he was traded to the 76ers when he had growing frustration with them. And now he's set to miss this offseason, this training camp as well. So kind of crazy. It's going to be interesting to see what the Sixers end up getting for him. I mean, he will be traded eventually. The question is when. I could totally see him going into the season still being on the Sixers roster because I don't think Daryl Morey's going to settle for anything. I think that he's going to push the limits, even if that makes Harden more and more frustrated. Would not surprise me one bit. But I do think that obviously James Harden will get traded eventually. I think that him sitting out too is going to hurt the amount that the Sixers are going to get for him because every team knows that they're kind of desperate to just get rid of this guy. Well, every team could think that, but they could also think that this is the last year of James Harden's contract. He's said to be an unrestricted free agent after this season, regardless. So if they refuse to trade him and he continues to sit out, he's going to keep getting fined and stuff. They won't even have to pay a ton of his contract that he's owed this year. I think he's owed like $37 million or something like that for this season. That's going to keep going down and down and down the more time that he misses and the longer that he's away from the team. So that could be another thing to watch out for too. The Sixers might say to teams like, this is our price for James Harden. If you don't give that to us, we're just not going to accept a trade. We'll keep him on the roster. He won't get paid until he eventually settles and maybe reports to the team and starts playing or something like that. But you can argue that case. You can argue that it's hurting the stock. You can also argue, though, that the 76ers are a title contender. You have Joel Embiid, and having this circus go on in the background throughout the entire season is not good for the Sixers franchise at all. And especially with the Bucks and the Celtics, who just got a ton better, and you take James Harden off the Sixers, and it's just Joel Embiid, that team is not as competitive right off the bat just from the roster. But if you also have this Harden circus going on in the background, it's going to hurt them even more. And you might waste another year of Joel Embiid, and who knows, you could very well see Joel Embiid requesting a trade if that goes on at some point during this season or after this season. I would not be surprised. He is interested in, he wants to win with the 76ers, but with this kind of stuff going on, I wouldn't be surprised if he, steps away and takes an alternate route for all of that. So James Harden will miss the start of training camp. News that is not too shocking. And then our last piece of news before we jump back into the NBA season previews, Kai Jones stepping away from the Hornets. So this is a very interesting story. Not exactly sure what's going on here, but after several strange social media posts, Kai Jones has been told to step away from the team from head coach Steve Clifford. Kai Jones, I think, he's entering the third year of his NBA career, big man out of Texas. The main stuff that he's been doing over the past few weeks, he's been cursing and dancing in many weird videos that he's been posting on Instagram and Twitter. He's also been calling out fans, tweeting profanity, arguing about that, and hinting that he is the best center on the league in the NBA. Not the NBA, on the Hornets. He's been kind of hinting that he's the best center on the Hornets, kind of downplaying PJ Washington and all those guys. So he's kind of like almost calling out his teammates in a way through his social media posts. Miles Bridges came out and tried to call him out publicly. Obviously, Miles Bridges just re-signed with the Charlotte Hornets, so he's kind of the veteran that's trying to take control of this situation. But Kai Jones didn't really respond to that very well. So for whatever reason, we don't know where this stems from. We don't know why this is going on, and we don't even know what necessarily he's doing that's wrong. I mean, this doesn't come from the NBA. He's not really doing anything that the NBA can step in and like fine him or suspend him for. I know that cursing and stuff and like calling out fans and stuff they could step in for, but the main thing I think about this is just the weird persona that he's taking on social media, and the Hornets don't like that. The Hornets aren't big fans of what he's doing and the way that he's going about things and all that kind of stuff. So I think that that's the main reason that they kind of sent him away. They don't want him to be this distraction to. I mean, the Charlotte Hornets are heading into the season coming off one of their worst years in franchise history. They were 27-55 last year. LaMelo Ball barely played. They did not have a good season. And they're going into this season with practically the exact same roster, hoping that LaMelo Ball will play a full season and stay healthy. But the Hornets have enough distractions. They're definitely one of the favorites to be one of the worst in the NBA, probably get one of the top picks. They are bringing in Brandon Miller, who is the third overall pick and in this year's draft, who was a star out of Alabama. They're bringing in a few different rookies to shake things up. Miles Bridges is back too after not playing at all last season, following a bunch of different things. He was a free agent, didn't accept his qualifying offer. He had some domestic violence charges that he was sifting through that were eventually dropped. And the team kind of stayed away from him. So he dealt with a lot of personal stuff last season and ended up missing the entire year. I think he was also hurt at the same time as well. But he never accepted the qualifying offer. It was still kind of confusing if he was actually still under contract with the Hornets last season. I don't think he got paid or anything, but he might have still been on team control since he didn't accept or deny the qualifying offer. I think he just left it sitting out there. So he'll be back, and they'll be hoping that some of the rookies that they drafted can step in and kind of change the team around if LaMelo Ball plays too. They were a playing team just 2 years ago when LaMelo Ball had his first All-Star season, and last year they had a terrible year. So it'll be interesting to see how much they can turn things around. But Kai Jones stepping away from the team, we'll definitely have more information when we have it on future episodes, but we'll see where Kai Jones is, going to be going forward. So those are the top four headlines. And jumping over from there, we're going to jump back into our NBA season previews. We did 2 divisions last week, and now we're going to do 2 more divisions. We'll have the last division, the Eastern Conference, the Southeast Division, and then the first division of the Western Conference, the Northwest Division. And living up in the Northeast area, it's very difficult to find fans of the Miami Heat or the fans of the Washington Wizards, the Denver Nuggets, Minnesota Timberwolves, teams that were those kind of teams that we're going to be going over today. So it'll just be me on this one. We'll be trying to bring you some good guests for the last 2 divisions, which is going to be the Lakers division and then also the Dallas Mavericks division. But kicking things off, we'll have the Southeast Division, and the Atlanta Hawks are entering the year. In year 2 of the Quinn Snyder era, Nate McMillan was fired, and Quinn Snyder was hired mid-season last year. And after being a longtime head coach of the Utah Jazz, he left the Jazz after they traded Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. They kind of went in a different direction. Will Hardy took over, and he'll be entering his second year. We'll be going over the Jazz a little bit later in the show, but Quinn Snyder entering the second year of his tenure now with the Atlanta Hawks. The team looks relatively similar to what they did at the end of last year. They traded for Sadiq Bey last year, and he'll be one of the main pieces. They traded away John Collins too. John Collins is now at Utah Jazz, and they've been looking to trade him. It feels like for the past 3 years. So they finally got rid of him. So my projected lineup: Trae Young and DeJounte Murray will be back with the Hawks to lead the backcourt, and then the front court, Sadiq Bey, DeAndre Hunter, and Clint Capella should lead the front court in the lineup. And coming off the bench, they got AJ Griffin, who will be a second-year shooting guard now for them. They have high high hopes for AJ Griffin. They think that he could be a very, very good player. He's going to get an increased role this year now with a couple of guys out. He is kind of a stretch three as well. He plays the small forward a little bit. Bogdan Bogdanovic will also be headed back. Patty Mills was added as well via trade. Patty Mills, I think, was traded like 3 times this offseason. He was on the Brooklyn Nets last year. He's traded to a couple of different teams, but he wound up with the Atlanta Hawks, and he's going to start the season with the Atlanta Hawks. Onyeka Okongwu, too, who was a lottery pick a few years ago, hasn't really developed into the starter that they kind of projected, but he'll back up Clint Capella, probably have a little bit of an increased role. And then Jalen Johnson as well, with Kobe Buffkin being their top pick, their first round pick. So the biggest additions were Patty Mills and Kobe Buffkin. Buffkin is a shooting guard / point guard out of University of Michigan. He kind of rose up the draft ranks in an interesting way towards the end of last season. And they think he could develop into an athletic playmaking guard who can score around the rim. And so they're going to add him to the team. There's a lot of rumors if they'll trade DeJounte Murray, if they let him go in free agency, all that kind of stuff. Last year was his first year with the Hawks, but Kobe Buffkin, if DeJounte Murray ends up leaving, Buffkin might end up being the guy that ultimately replaces him. And then the rookies, Kobe Buffkin, Mohamed Gueye, who's a big man from Washington State, and Seth Lundy, who is a 3-and-D guy, hence the name of the show, from Penn State, who kind of rose up the draft ranks pretty high. So the Atlanta Hawks are hoping to come into this year with a little bit of a better team. The Southeast Division is very wide open. I mean, you got 3 teams who no one really expects to be competitors in the Hornets, Magic, and Wizards. I mean, you have the Miami Heat as well, but the Heat and the Hawks should be at the top of the division. I can see the Hawks definitely being a playoff team, and could very well be in the top part of the play-in or a 5 or 6 seed, in my opinion. So Atlanta Hawks enter the new year in a very interesting situation. And then for the next team in the division, you got the Charlotte Hornets. So the Charlotte Hornets, we kind of went over a little bit just a few minutes ago with the Kai Jones situation. But Steve Clifford is entering his second year in his second stint with the Charlotte Hornets. They had a terrible season last year, being 27-55. They ended up getting the 3rd overall pick and brought in Brandon Miller, who's a wing from Alabama, in a very good move. He'll probably slot into the starting lineup. Their projected starting lineup will be LaMelo Ball and Terry Rozier in the backcourt, and then Brandon Miller, PJ Washington, and Mark Williams should be their starting front court. They have a solid bench. Gordon Hayward is entering the final year of that huge and kind of crazy contract that he got from the Charlotte Hornets, getting paid $30 million a year. He'll be getting paid $30 million again this year, and he has contributed next to nothing to the Hornets since they brought him in after signing that contract. But Gordon Hayward will be one of the top guys off the bench. Miles Bridges also will be returning, as we talked about before, after a year away from the team. Cody Martin will also be coming off the bench. James Bouknight as well, and Nick Richards will be some of the top guys coming off the bench. Nick Smith Jr. as well will be one of their rookies. The biggest additions kind of came through the draft. I mean, bringing Miles Bridges back, if you want to count that as an addition. Brandon Miller being the number 3 overall pick, and Nick Smith Jr., who was a top 5 recruit heading into this past season in college basketball. He was hurt a lot for his 1 year at Arkansas, but he ended up still being a first-round pick. He's got a lot of potential on the scoring end, but they also said that about James Bouknight too, and he'll be entering his 3rd year without much identity to his game. He was a good scorer at UConn, but hasn't really done too much else. So the rookies, they're bringing in Brandon Miller, Nick Smith Jr., and then Amari Bailey will also be an interesting guy to look out for. He was another 5-star recruit, played at UCLA this past year, and had a very up and down season. Dealt with a couple of injuries, some inconsistency shooting, but developed into a more sound player towards the end of the season. So they'll be an interesting one to see what happens. I don't really expect much out of the Charlotte Hornets this year. I think that they were 27-55 last year. If you get LaMelo Ball for an entire season and Miles Bridges for an entire season, they should be decently better than that. but they're still a 10 to 12 game under 500 team, I think. They're practically bringing back the same roster, and 27 wins last year. How many wins does LaMelo Ball give you alone? Probably a few more than that, but I don't think much more. And you got the craziness now going on with Kai Jones. You don't know what's going to happen with him, but I'm not expecting too much out of the Charlotte Hornets. But a team I'm expecting a pretty decent amount about is the Miami Heat. So the Miami Heat enter the brand new year coming off of their second NBA Finals appearance in the past 4 seasons. They also appeared in the NBA Finals in the 2020 bubble, where they lost the Los Angeles Lakers, and then they appeared this year where they lost the Denver Nuggets. And they've had the same core, pretty much the same core throughout that. Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and Tyler Hero now have made 2 NBA Finals appearances and lost both of them. Eric Spoelstra will be entering his 16th season as head coach of the Miami Heat. Pretty crazy. He's now been to 6 NBA Finals. He's won 2 and lost 4. He won 2 and lost 2 during the LeBron and Wade era. Now he's lost 2 during the Jimmy Butler era. So he's 2-4 in the NBA Finals. Spoelstra, one of the better head coaches in the NBA, has not been able to figure out. Has had some woes in the NBA Finals. I mean, he has 2 championships to his name, but he's been to 6 total throughout his 15 years with the Miami Heat. Now this will be his 16th year. So the lineup will look relatively similar to what it did at the end of last season when they went on their run. Tyler Hero will probably start. Caleb Martin will also start. Jimmy Butler, Kevin Love, and Bam Adebayo should probably be their starting 5, who all started towards last season. Gabe Vincent became the starting point guard because Tyler Hero missed the majority of the playoffs last year. And then coming off the bench, you still have Kyle Lowry, you still have Duncan Robinson, who should be 2 of the top guys off the bench. Josh Richardson, they brought in this year. Jaime Jaquez, who is a good scorer, rookie out of UCLA. Will be very, very interesting to see what you get out of him. Thomas Bryant, who's a backup center, and then Nikola Jovic, who was a rookie last year, and will be another guy to see. They're hoping can develop into a pretty solid player. They think that he could be a good wing. They lost 3 big pieces, though, the Miami Heat did, and they didn't really bring in anything to replace those guys. Gabe Vincent left in free agency. He's on a 3-year deal with Los Angeles Lakers. Max Strus also left in free agency, signed a 3-year deal with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Those 2 guys were pivotal pieces to their Eastern Conference championship team last year. They both had huge playoff runs. Gabe Vincent hit so many big shots. Max Strus was a great 3-point shooter and a great defender. So those are 2 pieces that are going to be missed big time. And I mean, obviously Tyler Hero was hurt during most of the playoff run. That's why Gabe Vincent kind of got the time that he got. But the kind of development and that you saw from those 2 guys was part of the reason why they went on their run. And then Victor Oladipo, too, who has barely played throughout his time with the Miami Heat. He also got traded away. He's on the Oklahoma City Thunder now. He is a pretty decent loss because he's a very solid player when he plays. He was a former All-Star. The injuries have really gotten to him, and he has not been the best player, been that great of a player since then. But he's still a pretty decent loss. So those 3 guys are big losses for the team. And their really only big additions were Josh Richardson, who, is a role player. He's bounced around from team to team over the last few years, decent shooting guard, and Jaime Jaquez, who's a rookie out of UCLA. He's the only rookie on this Miami Heat team. But they do think that you can get a decent amount out of Jaquez. They think that he'll develop into a very solid NBA player, could even be a starter. They think he's an all-around good scorer, crafty ball handler, good defender. So makes things interesting. Overall, though, this Miami Heat team, with the way that the Bucks just leveled up and the way the Celtics just leveled up, it's tough to see this team making it back to the NBA Finals and making it past those teams without injuries playing a factor. But Jimmy Butler, since he joined the Miami Heat back in 2019, he has kind of overperformed almost every roster that they've had. They've made it to 2 NBA Finals in that time, and were outmatched in both NBA Finals. They were not going to beat the Nuggets, and they were not going to beat the Lakers in the bubble. That was just kind of a known fact. They were underdogs in both of those NBA Finals, but he was able to lead them through the Eastern Conference twice now. And it'll be interesting to see if he can do that again, because again, it's the one thing that they do have on their side is chemistry. And the Bucks and Celtics are going to may take a little bit of time to get that chemistry. The Sixers are going to fall off. I mean, the Heat are definitely a better team than the Sixers, but the Heat do have the chemistry. They have a lot of guys coming back. You have a lot of veteran leadership too. I mean, you got a bunch of potential future Hall of Famers in Kevin Love and Kyle Lowry, who are not the same players they were even a couple of years ago, but are veteran leadership. They both won NBA championships too. They know what it takes to make it to a finals and win a finals. And they were both key parts of both of those championship teams. Both Kyle Lowry and Kevin Love were. So it'll be interesting to see. Definitely be interesting. And now jumping over to the bottom two teams in this division, the Orlando Magic. Magic entered the third year of the Jamal Mosley era, and they're really just trying to find an identity, to be completely honest. They had a great year from Paolo Banchero, who was the number one overall pick in 2022. He ended up winning Rookie of the Year. He looks like he'll be their franchise player. Franz Wagner has developed into a very, very solid wing as well. But some of their guards, they haven't seen a ton out of. Jalen Suggs, they've expected a lot more out of him. He hasn't developed too much. And Cole Anthony as well. Cole Anthony has had some big inconsistencies scoring. That's why he fell in the draft where he did. He was one of the top incoming freshmen when he went to North Carolina. And a lot of people had big hopes for him as well. But he kind of fell in the draft because inconsistency scoring while at North Carolina, and he's kind of brought that over the NBA. So they're projected starting five. In my book, Markelle Fultz and Jalen Suggs will be the backcourt. Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero, and Wendell Carter Jr. will be the front court. Coming off the bench, they'll have Gary Harris, who they were able to re-sign, Joe Ingles, who they were able to sign on a 2-year deal, I believe, coming over from the Milwaukee Bucks last season after spending his entire career with the Utah Jazz before that. Anthony Black, who was their first-round pick this past year, Jed Howard, who was another first-round pick. They got 2 lottery picks coming in, so that should help the team out a little bit. Jonathan Isaac will be coming back too, who showed a lot of promise, but has dealt with ton of injuries, tore his ACL and missed 2 entire seasons because of it. Chuma Okeke, Mo Wagner, and Caleb Houston will also all be coming off the bench. So the top guys that they added to the team were Joe Ingles, Jed Howard, and Anthony Black. Both Jed Howard and Anthony Black were their lottery picks this past year. I don't have them starting right off the bat, but they can 100% start going forward. I think it would be a little bit more difficult for Jed Howard to start because they got Wagner, Banchero, and Carter in that front court, and that's pretty clogged up, to be completely honest. And then Anthony Black and Markelle Fultz will be 2 interesting situations there. But the Orlando Magic, don't expect too much out of there as well. Probably a 30-ish win team at most. They're probably going to be in the same boat as Charlotte Hornets. And then rounding out the division, you got the Washington Wizards. So the Washington Wizards are entering the 3rd year of the Wes Unseld Jr. era. They shook up the team a ton. This Wizards team is completely different than what they came out with at the end of last season. They decided to rebuild. So obviously they had the Bradley Beal trade. They shipped him off to the Suns, got a bunch of stuff back for him. Shipped out Kristaps Porzingis, got a lot back for him. Monte Morris, they traded, got a decent amount back for him. And then they also had a bunch of draft picks too. So their biggest additions, Tyus Jones, Jordan Poole, Landry Shamet, Bilal Coulibaly, who was their lottery pick, Danilo Gallinari, Mike Muscala, and Ryan Rollins were their big additions. So that's a lot of additions for an NBA roster to come into a new season. My projected lineup for them, Tyus Jones and Jordan Poole will most likely be the backcourt. Jordan Poole is probably going to be the guy that they're developing into their future centerpiece and leading scorer. They were also able to re-sign Kyle Kuzma to a 4-year contract. So Kuzma does come back. Denny Avdija, Kuzma, and Daniel Gafford will probably be the front court. Coming off the bench, you have Corey Kispert, who got a lot of minutes towards down the stretch last season. Great 3-point shooter. Landry Shamet, who's a good NBA veteran. DeLon Wright, as well. Bilal Koulibaly, who's a stretch guard, who was their lottery pick this past year. It'll be interesting to see what they kind of use him for. He can definitely. They think he can develop into the starting point guard, but he's a little bit of a project. He's 19 years old. He's a little bit raw. He played on the same team as Victor Wembanyama this past season in France. So it'll be interesting to see what he is, but he probably will take some time to kind of develop into the NBA game. And then they got a few veterans as well. Danilo Gallinari was a throw-in in a couple of the trades they made. Mike Muscala was a throw-in in a couple of trades they made. And Taj Gibson, they actually re-signed to a one-year deal. So those three guys, three veteran, mid-30-year-olds. Well, Mike Muscala is only like around 30, but Gallinari and Taj Gibson, a bit older. Veteran guys who can definitely help, if they hold on to them, can definitely help teach these young guys a few things. I think that it would be good for them to hold on to some of these guys. I mean, Taj Gibson, they re-signed to a one-year deal, so they'll definitely hold on to him for the season. But Gallinari and Muscala will be interesting to see if those guys get bought out. They're getting paid a decent amount of money too, so they may have to eat those contracts and just buy them out. They're not really paying too much more. I mean, they just re-signed Kyle Kuzma. Jordan Poole got that big extension from the Warriors last offseason after winning the NBA Finals, and then got traded immediately this year. So be interesting to see what the Wizards do. I don't expect too much out of them. I think that they're going to be kind of bottom dwellers in the Eastern Conference. Might end up even being the worst team in the Eastern Conference, but they could be a favorite to having a top 3, top 4 pick for sure when it comes down to that. So that wraps it up for the Eastern Conference. And now shifting over to the Western Conference, we're going to do one of the divisions before we wrap things up for this episode. We'll do the Northwest Division, and leading things off will be the reigning NBA champions, the Denver Nuggets, entering the 9th year of the Michael Malone era. Honestly, there's not a whole lot to say about the Denver Nuggets because they bring back practically the exact same team. They just won the NBA Finals, and they're going to be looking to repeat. Nikola Jokic got snubbed for his 3rd straight MVP this past year. Very well should have gotten it over Joel Embiid, but he ended up winning an NBA championship instead. So I think he'll keep that trade off. Their predicted starting 5 is the same as the finals last year: Jamal Murray, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, Nikola Jokic. Coming off the bench, they re-signed Reggie Jackson. They still have Christian Brown, who was a rookie last year, who ended up playing some big minutes. DeAndre Jordan, they re-signed to a one-year deal. Didn't get much time down the stretch last year. Justin Holiday, they were able to bring in. Vlatko Čančar. And then they brought in 3 rookies too. Jalen Pickett, who, in my opinion, could be a Monte Morris kind of player. That was a sneaky good pick that they ended up taking in the late 1st round. A lot of people had him going undrafted. Point guard from Penn State, played 5 years at Penn State and put up tremendous numbers. He's a bit small, 6 foot or 6'1", but it is a heads-up player. And I think under the development that Michael Malone has for the Denver Nuggets, he could easily become a very solid role player. May not become a starter, but he could very well develop into kind of what Monte Morris was for a while with them as their backup point guard. Julian Strawther, who's a good 3-and-D guy from Gonzaga, and then Hunter Tyson, big man from Clemson, they also bring in. And Zeke Naji as well. He's been kind of bottom of the bench for last several years, but he'll be coming back. And their losses, they really only have 2 notable losses. Bruce Brown, who was one of their key players down the stretch last year to win the NBA Finals. He signed a 3-year deal, massive deal with the Indiana Pacers to kind of become their starting small forward. And then Jeff Green, too, who signed a 1-year deal to be a role player to come off the bench. He signed a deal to go back to the Houston Rockets, who he played for previously. And then 3 rookies we talked about: Pickett, Strawther, and Hunter Tyson. So Denver Nuggets, definitely still one of the favorites to come out of the West, if not the favorites, probably betting favorites to come out of the West. I could definitely see them doing it again. It'll be interesting to see who comes out of the East that will play them. But I like a few other teams too in the West. I think the Denver Nuggets will be at the top of the conference. I don't know if they'll be the 1 seed again like they were the last 2 years, but I think that they'll definitely be a very solid team. But I think that things will shake up a little bit. It's very hard to repeat I'm not sure if they make it back to the NBA Finals, but they do have the stability to do it because they got all these guys under contract for a long time. They're going to be able to keep that core that won them an NBA Finals together for a while. So it'll make things a little bit more interesting. And coming up now, a couple wild cards who I think are big potential teams to make runs in the Western Conference this year. The Minnesota Timberwolves being the first one. Chris Finch entering the fourth year of his tenure with the Minnesota Timberwolves. They practically keep the same roster as they had last year. They had a very, very solid team last year. We saw Anthony Edwards develop into one of the better players in the NBA. He became an all-star. Rudy Gobert did not have a great year after giving up 5 first-round picks for him. But Karl Anthony Towns was able to stay healthy for practically the entire year. They brought in Mike Conley Jr., who's a good point guard. Still good veteran presence for them. So it'd make things interesting. So their predicted lineup would be Conley, Edwards, Kyle Anderson, Karl Anthony Towns, and Rudy Gobert. Coming off the bench, they still have Jalen McDaniels. Naz Reid was re-signed to a 3-year deal, one of the better backup bigs in the NBA. They were able to re-sign him. Shake Milton was also signed from the Philadelphia 76ers. He's a combo guard, good bench player. Nickeil Alexander-Walker as well. Troy Brown Jr., who came over from the Los Angeles Lakers, that will all be coming off the bench for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And so their biggest additions were Shake Milton, Deshaun Nix, and Troy Brown Jr. So they didn't bring in too much. They brought in Brown and Milton, who are good bench players for their respective teams. And the one rookie they brought in was Leonard Miller, who played in the G League last year. Lefty, stretch 4, who is a good all-around scorer, can develop into a solid NBA talent, I think. I mean, a lot of people thought he could be a first-round pick, and he kind of fell with a little bit of inconsistent play, but he's definitely a solid player. I think that the Timberwolves, my outtake on them this year is that they have the potential to be a sneaky, solid team that can get a 5 or a 6 seed. I think at their floor, I think, is the 9 or 10 at the bottom of the play-in tournament, but their ceiling could very well be the 4th or 5th seed. I think this Timberwolves team is a lot better. We'll see if everything can start to click finally, because it seems like even though they finally put this team together, some things always come into the way of the Minnesota Timberwolves, and they're never able to perform to expectations. But I like the way that they look. I think they have a very good veteran starting 5. Anthony Edwards is still young, but the rest of the guys are all good veterans. Bunch of them being former All-Stars as well. And then their bench is a bunch of young players who have embraced the role of coming off the bench. McDaniels had a great year last year. Naz Reid has developed into one of the better backup centers, and they reward him with a pretty decent contract this year. And Nickeil Alexander-Walker, too, who they were able to acquire. So I think the Timberwolves could be really good. And then another team in their division who I think can also be a sneaky team is the Oklahoma City Thunder. So the Oklahoma City Thunder, I'm going to start off by saying my ceiling for them is probably a 4th or 5th seed, as well as the Minnesota Timberwolves in the Western Conference. I think that this Thunder team is good. They finally put together a good young core of guys who are ready to compete and can make some noise in the Western Conference. And they got a couple of veterans too. So they added Victor Oladipo, who probably will come off the bench for them, hoping he stays healthy. Davis Bertans, they also acquired, who's on that really bad contract, but can hit some threes off the bench for them. And then their two rookies, Cason Wallace, who was one of the top point guards in this upcoming draft, can possibly develop into a decent option outside of Shea. And you could switch Giddey to the 3 potentially and have Wallace and Shai as the backcourt for them. But my projected lineup for the Oklahoma City Thunder, you got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Josh Giddey will be the starting backcourt. And then the starting front court is Luguentz Dort, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren. So Chet Holmgren also is the wild card here. He missed all of his rookie season after tearing his Achilles in a pickup game that he was playing against LeBron and a bunch of other NBA players. But he will be entering his now rookie season, which will be a year later. It was not too long ago that we were talking about Chet Holmgren being similar to Victor Wembanyama. I mean, Wembanyama's hype is much more extreme than almost anybody we've ever seen since LeBron James. But Chet Holmgren, we were talking about him in the same regard. He's kind of a unicorn. He's a 7 foot plus guy who can handle the ball, great defender, great shot blocker, step out and hit the three. Basically, can do a little bit of everything. And we'll finally see him playing for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I think if he develops into the player that we thought that he could, this is a tough team, very tough team. Then coming off the bench, you got Victor Oladipo, Alexei Pokashevsky, who started all year last year at center for them while Holmgren was out, and has developed into a very solid NBA big man. Aaron Wiggins, you got Jalen Williams, the other Jalen Williams, the big man. They have two Jalen Williams on the Thunder, spelled differently. But then Jeremiah Robinson Earl, who's gotten some time, who's gotten a lot of starting time in the past years for the rebuilding Thunder. Davis Bertans and Cason Wallace. So that's the Thunder. I think that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a top 10 player in the NBA now. Josh Giddey has developed into a very, very solid player. Jalen Williams had a tremendous rookie year and looks like he can be a very good scoring / defending option at either wing. Luguentz Dort is a great defender. Chet Holmgren is going to be coming back and could become that 1-2 punch with Shai. I like the Thunder a lot. I think that if Dagnall gets the team correct and they're able to stay healthy, a 4 or 5 seed is their ceiling. Absolutely. Then the final two teams in the division, both teams that we aren't expecting too much for. First off, the Portland Trailblazers obviously just traded away Damian Lillard, so they now have lost Damian Lillard, Drew Eubanks, Nazir Little, Yusuf Nurkic, and Cam Reddish. They're going into full rebuild mode, but they've acquired a few decent guys, though. Scoot Henderson, they drafted with a second overall pick. He and Anthony Simons now will be the future backcourt, which could be a very fun backcourt. Both two small guards who are extremely athletic, Russell Westbrook type players. Anthony Simons has already developed into a very, very good scorer in the NBA. Scoot Henderson has the potential to being one of the better point guards in the NBA in the next few years. And then you got Shaedon Sharpe, who had a pretty decent rookie year. You got Jeremy Grant and you got DeAndre Ayton. They just re-signed Jeremy Grant to be kind of their go-to scorer, their veteran leader now that Lillard's gone. And then coming off the bench, you got Malcolm Brogdon. If they hold on to him, Matisse Thybulle, they just re-signed for a few years. Robert Williams III, who will back up DeAndre Ayton. Chris Murray, who they just drafted in the first round, a lefty stretch 4 from Iowa. Justice Winslow they still have, and Kevin Knox they were able to re-sign. So this team is definitely very interesting. They're not going to compete very much, but they got a few young pieces, and they were able to acquire some talent for the future. You know, Scoot Henderson, Anthony Simons, Shaedon Sharpe, Jeremy Grant, DeAndre Ayton, Robert Williams III, Matisse Thybulle, Chris Murray. These are all guys that are going to be sticking around for a while now for the Trailblazers. They don't have many guys who are just on 1-year deals. They've got a few guys that they're going to hope spark their rebuild, but they also acquired a lot of first-round picks that they're going to be very active in that market as well. And wrapping things up, we have the Utah Jazz. So the Jazz traded away Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell going into last season, and everybody thought that they were headed for a rebuild. They're kind of in the same situation that the Trailblazers are this year. They were last year. They traded away their star players, ended up getting a few good veterans, and were able to compete for a while last year. And that's honestly potentially what could happen with the Trailblazers. We were very shocked by the Utah Jazz last year, but they trade away Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, and they brought in Lauri Markkanen, they brought in Walker Kessler. Jordan Clarkson still remained under contract and just re-signed. They brought in Colin Sexton as well as part of the Donovan Mitchell trade. And their lineup now is looking like Colin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson, Lauri Markkanen, who was an all-star for the first time in his career, developing into their star player, John Collins, who they just acquired from the Atlanta Hawks this offseason, and Walker Kessler, who's becoming who had a tremendous rookie year, all rookie. He made an all-rookie team, and one of the better defenders and shot blockers in the entire NBA, could end up developing into the next league-leading shot blocker as well. And then you got Kelly Olynyk still under contract, Taylor Horton-Tucker, Ashaya Baji, and then a few rookies they also have. Taylor Hendricks, who was their lottery pick, Keontae George, who's a shooting guard, and Bryce Sensabaugh, who's another shooting guard. And then Chris Dunn, and will also be under contract. So this Jazz team is interesting. They stuck into the playoffs last year. They ended up having a much better year than we expected. A lot of people thought they were going to be one of the worst teams in the Western Conference, like myself. They ended up just getting the best out of all the guys that they were able to put together. They acquired a bunch of first-round picks, and they were able to do a lot with them. So that's going to wrap it up for our NBA season previews for this week. They would like to thank everyone for tuning into the Empty the Bench Podcast Network for another episode of the 3&D. Once again, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel and follow the social media at the 3&D ETB. We'll be putting out content all week in case you missed the entire episode. So make sure you follow us at the 3&D ETB. Hope everyone has a great night. A lot of news just came in, so keep digesting all of that, and we'll be back to wrap up our NBA season previews next week.